Moses and Ezis and Shabbos HaGadol. It's a big Shabbos. And so we're going to be looking at something together this morning, which has always intrigued me. I have to admit, you know, it says the servant to Pharaoh that I wish that I would have given a lot more time in preparing these sources, because there's a ton on this. It's a very, very rich and big topic, and I don't think we'll do justice to it in the next 45 minutes. And in many ways, there's a lot of, since Pesach is all about what we do together in terms of interpretive modes and how we increase like interpretation, it's like, you know, more, there's more. So I'm feeling like there's a lot of room here for your thoughts and your feelings that that might or might not align with many of the sources that I didn't offer. There's kind of a lot of Torah on this, and the topic, of course, is big because everything around Passover is a big thing, and Shabbat HaGadol is no different. And so, if you we'll open up the Berachot Torah, and then we'll go into the source sheet, which you'll find in the chat area. I'll also share the screen with you as well. So let's say Berachot Torah, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asot b'divrei Torah. Okay. No, she's not good. Something. Okay. Okay. מה נשתנה הלילה הזה מכל הלילות, מכל הלילות. I know Suzanne Tachko is like sitting about to break out in a chazanas. מכל הלילות. It's amazing, you know. How many of you thought about this? How often that word Laila appears even in that Mishnah? It's a Mishnah taken from the 2nd century. It makes its way into the Haggadah, and it forms the core pedagogical underpinnings of the Haggadah. So the book of Exodus, where it says, "V'higata lebincha b'yom hahu lemor," it says, and you will tell your child, your son, your children on that day. And the rabbis of the Talmud, in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, actually underscore this kind of Socratic methodology that is an underpinning of what really was a Greek symposia, but it's kind of the notion that to tell a story without being prompted first with a question is not such a great story. It doesn't create tension, doesn't create learning. But what's most radical about this, which of course, not just the theory, but like the fact that it goes over and over again, incantationally over Halayla Hazeh, this night. Night as a theme in Passover is so profoundly important. It's such a profoundly interesting, oft-repeated notion that it's also like, what's going on here? What's going on with night in the text? The text here, for example, right? Halayla Zeh and all the reds, I don't even know if I got all of them right. There's Laila Zeh. We actually begin the night talking about and saying night. And then it gets more interesting. Of course, this doesn't stay in single mode. It went to 2 for some reason. And back again. Here we go. Just teaching online. Let's look at source number 2, which is from the Mishnah in Brachot, but also makes its way into the Haggadah. It's right there amongst the rabbis, right, who are staying up. What are they doing? They're staying up all night, all night long. I mean, this could be a Lionel Richie song, all night long. Mazkirin, right? It says in the Mishnah in chapter 1, Mazkirin Yitzia Mitzrayim Ba'leilot. We remember the Exodus from Egypt in the evenings. This is in the first Mishnah, in the first chapter of the first codification of Jewish law in the post-temple exilic period. Right? The rabbis were so obsessed with night, they started the Mishnah with night. Right? When do we say Shema in the night? And they said, but wait a second, when we say Shema at night, you say all of the Shema, all 3 paragraphs, or you just said the first paragraph, right? V'ahavta, or the second paragraph, Hayam Shema. No, you say the first. You say all 3. But wait a second, Not the last paragraph of the Shema is Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Lemor Tasulim Tzitzis, right? It's all about the tzitziot, and it gets to Egypt, right? And it says, right? Right? So the Mishnah says already in the 2nd century that there was a certain rabbi who couldn't believe that the Mishnah had codified that you can remember Exodus in the evenings, because he said, I'm 70 years old. I said, I didn't merit to say the Exodus of Egypt, meaning I didn't say, right, the translation here is that he, even though he said it, he didn't merit to persuade his colleagues, right, that it was also, they should also do it, until there was a certain rabbi named Ben Zoma, who came along and said that the verse in Deuteronomy 16 that says, in order to remember your leaving Egypt all the days of your life, if it would have just said the days of your life, it would have been, okay, only the days. The fact that it says, call all the days of your life, why does it have to tell us all the days? The word all is superfluous. To teach you the rabbinic way of understanding superfluous words, like it's an economy of language of God, or that whatever had said something that seems superfluous, it comes to teach us something. Teach us that all the days of your life includes the evenings, which is a really amazing thing. Just think about it. Forget about the sophistry, whether you hate that or love it, or like, oh, I love the rabbis, I can't stand the rabbis, like, why they have to live it this way. Like, just think for a moment that of the contradiction between the reality of Exodus, which takes place in the night, and the future remembrance of the Exodus, which needs this interpretive mode in order to be included. Like, in order to actually include remembering Exodus at night, which took place at night, and the Seder takes place at night, and then we open the Seder with night, 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 night. We needed Ben Zoma to come along and say that, there were a lot of rabbis who said we shouldn't remember at night. Night is not the time to remember the Exodus, even if it's place. There's something about night there's a certain ambivalence, a certain intensification of night, and also a certain reticence. Let's look at the verse, the next verse, source 3. Let's go to 3 we just did. Yeah. 3 is the source in the Mishnah. In Deuteronomy, the Mishnah is quoting this verse. Lo tochal chametz shivat yamim tochal matzot lechem oni. Right? You shall not eat anything leavened. Right? It has to be eaten. It's lechem oni. It's a lechem that is a poor person's bread, or suffering, a bread of suffering. This is a bread of dukkha, of suffering. Ki bechibazon yatzata. You left in haste, me'eretz Mitzrayim, from the land of Egypt. Lema'an tizkor, so that through eating this you will remember et yom tzitcha, the day of your leaving Egypt, not the night. The day here could be, okay, prosaically it means the event, the day, right? The day of, it didn't mean specifically, but it's playful, because then it becomes itself the source of night, right? So it says, Kol Yemei Chayecha, it repeats it, right? So the days include nights, according to one opinion, and according to the rabbis, they were adamant that it had nothing to do with the daytime and the nighttime, it had to do with the future redemption. The rabbis are like, no, we're not talking about night and day, we're talking about now and future, right? And so the rabbis absolutely insist that, according to the rabbis, we do not say Kriyat Shema at night, or the third paragraph of the Kriyat Shema at night, which is not the way the halacha is established, right? But they import this notion of present day reality and future reality. Okay, so let's go back a little bit into into the night. We'll get to the future and night and the future and exile and all that in a second. Chazek Adonai, source 4. God strengthens Pharaoh's heart, v'lo shilach et bnei Israel, and he didn't send the Jewish people. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe neteh yadcha al hashamayim, v'yichoshech al eretz Mitzrayim v'yamesh choshech. So God tells Moshe to stretch out your hand on the heavens and let there be dark, and let it be a thick darkness. Vayed Moshe yado al hashamayim, and Moshe stretches out his hand over the heavens. There was a thick, intense darkness on all of the land of Egypt for 3 days. One person didn't see their brother. And for 3 days, nobody got up, nobody moved. Darkness was so thick, they didn't see one another for 3 days. But for Israel, the children of Israel, there was light where they, in their settlement, right? There was light. And so then Pharaoh says to him, right, go worship God, only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind, even your dependents may go with you. Moshe says, no. He said, no. You're going to give us everything, and we're going to, right, and we'll also go worship God. He said, nothing will, no, not even a hoof will remain here. And Moshe says we have to take everything with us because we don't know what we're going to use until we get there. And God strengthens Pharaoh's heart, and didn't want to send them away. And then this, Vayomer lo Pharaoh lechmi alai, get out of here, get out, leave me. Now watch yourself, which is very powerful because it's going to come back in another moment of night. He says, Hishamer lecha, watch over yourself. Right? Watch yourself. The word shamor here, Hishamer, like the word from Vishamru b'nei Yisrael. Observe yourself. Be careful, he says. Alto safe. Do not come back or otpanai to see my face. Why? On the day that you see that I see your face, the day you see my face, you will die. On the day, in other words, when there's like at night, you won't see my face. But if you come back in day, so it's so remarkable. This is the penultimate moment before the ultimate night, and it's the penultimate, right? As you know, Nechama Leibowitz talked about this. Like it's almost like a return to the darkness of pre-creation. God is about to turn over the world again, as it were. And it's one of the key features of nature, and God was fighting with nature, as it were, or showing God's nature's subservience to God's power, is to now bring in choshech, bring in the ability to remove light from the world and put light where they need it to be. But then the text then plays with this, like it's now, the next moment in the tension is that Pharaoh says, you can't come back and see my face. And the truth of the matter is that Moshe will never see Pharaoh again by day. He will see him only by night. He'll be called into Pharaoh, Gesundheit. Pharaoh will call Moshe in at night. Now look at the very next thing. In chapter 11, Vayomer Moshe, source 5, Vayomer Moshe, Ko Amar Adonai, Kachatzot Lahalayla, Ani Yotzei B'toch Mitzrayim. Right? Moshe says, thus God says, I will come to you not by day, but by night. Ani yotzei b'toch Mitzrayim. It's powerful, actually, by the way. Just think of ani yotzei, the word that God says, I will exodus, I'll come out in Egypt, right? You'll be aware of me, right? I've been hidden, but now you'll see me in some way. Ani yotzei b'toch Mitzrayim. I'm going to go amongst all of you. And it was that in the Makat Bechorah, it happens, right? It's all about nighttime. Now, like, just to stop here for a second and say, like, I don't know if I've convinced you already, but have I convinced you that there's something going on here with night? Yes. And so before we go forward, like, what do you think is happening with night? Why is night such a powerful motif in the Exodus narrative, number one? And number two, what is the rhetorical device of day in contrast to night in the context of Egypt and slavery? Number two. Number three, what is significant in the ambivalence of the rabbis or the discussion about whether or not we can remember the Exodus at night? What do you what's your general sense around what's happening here? I'll open it up now and then come back into some of the sources. So night is playing a powerful motif. Anybody? We'll start with the room, and then we'll go to the Zoom. Go ahead, Daniel.
To me, the night is actually the womb. So coming out of the dark and being born. And there's further symbolism of like the lamb that sacrificed, it's in the fetal position, the blood around the portal that you go out and they go out when it's first light. So it's sort of like birth, right? Going out from the womb into the light, so it's starting a new life.
So for you, for Daniel, very midrashically, very beautifully, the images of birth are very much a part of the Exodus narrative. Like it begins with birth in some way, the proliferation by Yishritzu, by Yirbu. There's a lot of birth imagery and midwife imagery, and writ large, there are other symbols in the story, like the splitting of the Red Sea, which according to the Ari is like the water breaking, like the lintel and the blood around it is like the womb and the birth canal. So you're saying darkness here, like the darkness in the womb, in the gestation, as it were, of an infant or the embryo into a human being. That's what's happening here. It's being played off. Like dark light is like you are being reborn as a people and so on. Okay, beautiful. Yeah.
So I've always wondered about this because of the part in the Seder that goes Balayla.
Yeah.
And I was always thinking, and I really have no idea, I have no answer to your questions, but to me, the night is a very scary place. And that's what I have thought. The night is scary, and somehow or other, the Passover is like opening up the night in some way, illuminating the night to make it less scary or to illuminate it.
You know, the word, my Rebbe, one of my Rebbes, Reb Zalman was one Rebbe I had. My first real Rebbe was Moshe Weinberger, should live and be well. And he once gave a shiur, he gave a class called Splitting the Night. And the word chatzi, which means half, is to split. So when God comes, Vahi b'chatzi halayla, chatzot means to split something. Like chatzi is half, right? When you split something in half. So b'chatzot halayla is it's like split night. So the mystery of midnight is that it cuts the night, right? It's as if it's in the middle of a thing called night, and God cut it, to cut the night, to split the night. And he also said that the word Yaakov was vayibaka, is to split, and we always say the word bokeh when it comes to the Exodus was a lot about splitting things. Bokeh yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, bokeh, like to split something. And Yaakov represents the night in our tradition very much. He wrestles with the angel in the night. Everything that happens to Jacob happens to the night. His children go down to Egypt. So my Rebbe said, like what you said, that night was a very scary thing. And Yaakov is forever, the letters of Yaakov's name, Yaakov is Yibaka, that Jacob will split the night, and that his children will split the night. And so it's very like that to bring Exodus is a narrative about taking the scary night and splitting it open in some way. And I'll come back to that when we talk about Leil Shimurim, the night that is the watching night. Okay. Rabbi Van, yes.
I was just going to talk about splitting the night, but coming off your comment and Daniel's comment, in source 5, it really does feel like God's self is being born, right?
Ani Yotzei.
Ani Yotzei, the talking about. Like God splits the night.
Right, for God's self.
And the other thing I think is like,
that's beautiful.
You know, we talk about Yaakov like as a kind of a spiritual warrior, and anyone who's like a spiritual warrior has to take on the night. Like the day is like, okay, we can manage the day, we can manage the light, but the night represents like everything we get stuck in, and like that overwhelming force that's against us. And Passover is kind of the time to
open,
to split that, and walk right through.
I think it's really. I just want to say like how. Think about, I just want to add to what Rabbi Kolaris is saying, is like, in that very piece that we quote Elazar ben Azariah, right, that Mishnah we talked about, he said, I'm 70 years old, but I never merited to remember each of the night. So let's think about this for a moment narratively. The Talmud asks, why does he say, it's as if I'm 70 years old? Because he was 17 and he was the youngest person elected to be the head of the Sanhedrin, to be the head of the rabbinical court at the time. And because of his youth, they say that a miracle happened. There's like the lore in the Talmud that his beard went from being black to white overnight. And he looked as if, when he said, it's as if I'm 70 years old, because he really was 17, but like they're playing with time. And they're playing with like, they're playing with like the limit, like all of this energy around night and day and present and future. And then the end of the Mishnah, just to underscore your point, is that they say, what happens at the end of this Mishnah? 5 rabbis are getting together, they're in a B'nai Brak, and they're talking about the Exodus. And what happens in the story? They're up talking about the Exodus all night until a student comes and says, Higia Zman Kriat Shema Shel Shacharit. Like you were able to illuminate the night all the way with your Torah until the night was no longer a place of fear.
Just like Yaakov wrestling with the angel.
He wrestles
Brings us
all
from
the
the
way
night
until the sun
to
comes
the
up.
illumination.
It's exactly that. It's literally back to chapter 37, 32 of the book of Genesis. Like these 5 rabbis are talking about they're illuminating the night with Torah. So in the rabbinic worldview, the night is not scary. The night is the time for learning, right? The time to learn. So it's as if.
No, it is scary, and that's why it's a time to
Right,
learn.
exactly. It is scary. It becomes a time to
That's
it's
the
transformed.
tool by
Exactly.
which they greet the darkness.
Exactly. They greet the darkness with learning, and the learning itself becomes like a gestation for Torah is born at night, like it's born the way that a child gets. It's like
so
there's a lot of this
dark is
beautiful energy.
unknown, and studying becomes known.
All right, so I have a lot of people I promised until before we go to Jeffrey. We have to go, we did 3 or 4 minutes in the room. We're gonna go to Jay and Aluma, and then we'll come back in. Jay and we'll go to Sharon. Sharon, you're the last Zoomer. So anybody else after Sharon, you're gonna have to wait till the next time. So go ahead, Jay. And
It's a big question, one thought and one question. With regard to night and being scary and how we illuminate and get through it by learning, well, that's for the rabbis. For the rest of us, we say in the morning Shema Emet v'Yatziv, and in the evening we say Emet v'Emunah. And so it's faith for us. It's faith. It's the idea that if we believe and we have faith, we will survive the night and wake up in the morning. So that's it resonates in our tradition, and it's a little bit of a difference. My question is prompted by that weird line about Pharaoh saying you can't look at my face and not survive. Well, that is a meme, or that's something we encounter a lot, but not with respect to Pharaoh, but with respect to God. So I'm wondering why the tradition doesn't take that on directly, because so much of what happens with those plagues, et cetera, is to demonstrate the superiority of our God to Pharaoh. And yet, I would think we would deal with that directly, and Moshe would see his face and not die. But instead, Moshe doesn't see his face again during the day. So that puzzles me.
Good question. Come back, we'll see if by the end, maybe we'll have an answer for that. Okay, thanks, Jay. Aluma.
I don't know. For me, the darkness of the night is something that's very thick. It's very solid. And there's a lot hidden in the dark. It's like the unknown. So it kind of enables one to enter into the newness of the unknown and find what is hidden. And there lies the faith and the trust.
Yeah, I think that Romemu, like Aluma, you're the mystic that you are, the Sufi that you are, the shaman that you are, the dark in the mystical tradition becomes the dark night of the soul, becomes the place where things are the hidden things are found, Safun, like the hidden things in our Seder. And I think that befriending the night, as it were, is a very much a part of the kind of allegorical way that night is repurposed or reappropriated in a beautiful way. And I also think that for, in this particular narrative, I think that night is playing as a scary thing, and that otherwise the darkness of the plague and the ninth plague wouldn't make much sense, right? So I think that there are multiple ways to learn this, and I think that there are multiple ways to understand the properties of darkness, as whether they're fructive and creative and inviting, and depending on, I'm a night person, so like my own biorhythm has me up at night. I love night, and vampires love night. But like I think that the
zombies too.
I think the question of night as it's a a multifaceted, a multivariable quality is you're correct to put that out there. It's not, it's actually a time of vision and dreaming and so on. So a lot of beautiful things in the dark, and certainly our tradition is not in any way inured to that. Like I think if you look at the Zohar, you look at other mostly mystical sources, there's a tremendously important role that the dark has. But in this particular valence, I think it is more accurately gestative, but also terrifying in some way. And that's part of the polemic of the Torah here is exactly what Rabbi Dayan was speaking to, which is take something that is scary and split it open and forever reframe it for us in some way. But I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Aluma. And then Sharon, then we're going to come back into the room. Go ahead, Sharon.
I was going to say something of what you were just saying about the night being the time for visions. And the thing that I'm always aware of is all of these major holidays, of course, not Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they're on the full moon. So there's another kind of light that is there. And, that's, I think that's a spiritual light. And I think that's the visionary light. And that is when the dreaming happens. So I think there's a difference between seeing in the brightness of the sun and having visions, having the capacity to envision freedom, for instance, under the moonlight, under the full moon.
I love that. Let's come back to the potential power of the night, or its literal power of the night. Let's first take two more comments in the room, and then we'll go back to the sources. Thank you, Sharon Dolan. We're gonna come back to that. Batya and then Peretz.
So I was caught, I love the night. I love the night. And I love to turn the last light off and go, and it's very peaceful for me because it turns the day off, all the thoughts and everything that happened and blah, 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 blah. And so yeah, so I love them. But what I was caught at was the very, very beginning. And what we have to do to remember that we are no longer slaves.
Let's get to that in a second. I want to get to that in a second. We're no longer slaves. Talk about like the no longer slaves and our relationship with what was versus what is and what could be is really at the heart of how we think about night, and very much what Rabbi Koretzis was saying and others about this tension, the ambivalence between night as a reminder of what was horrible versus night as a repurposed and reimagined, place of strength and power. So I'm going to hold that. I'm going to go to Jeffrey and then
and just one
more.
Baruch atah Adonai sha'ayim no longer shalosani eved in the morning. That
The blessing
I'm no
of not
longer
being a slave.
That I'm not a slave.
Amen.
So like that the morning is a place where we bless that we're no longer slaves. We don't bless it in the night, we bless in the morning that we're no longer slaves. Okay, I'm gonna come back. That's beautiful also. Okay, Jeffrey, a lot of things to come back from Jeffrey.
Along the same theme. Another thing is when we meditate, we close our eyes, we create night. And of course, we sometimes think that the greatest insights come through night. But to go to your point and your Diane's point, maybe it's by facing fear in the night that we actually do our best learning. Whereas you have to face fears in order to surpass them and learn. So it like ties learning through the night and wisdom of the darkness together.
Let's look at that, because let's look at a number of interpretations of the night. The night itself of Passover has a very special name, and its name points to a lot of the things that we're speaking to, or let's say the ambiguity or the multi-interpretive possibilities of the name of the night that we say, Halayla Hazeh, this night, has a specific name in the text. If you look at source 8, and it'll bring us back to the source about Hishamer Lecha. Remember the Hishamer Lecha that Jay brought up about why didn't we face Pharaoh? Well, Pharaoh had said, "Be careful not to face me." Hishamer Lecha, be careful, watch yourself. And that's the word that is purposed in verse 42 in chapter 12. You see it in source 8. It says, "Leil shimurim hu ladonai." It is a night of vigil. the word for vigil in Hebrew is the same word used by Pharaoh. Be vigilant, right? Be careful. Leil Shimurim, it is a night of Shamur, Shmirah, right? Everybody got that word, Shmirah? Yeah, you got that, Tony?
I'm working on it.
Just say it. Just say it. Shmirah.
Shmirah.
Got it. You got it. Okay,
Thank you.
Shmirah.
My first Hebrew
There you
lesson
go.
from the rabbi.
There you go. Lo tziam eretz Mitzrayim hu halayla. That is the night hazeh. Ladonai shimurim lechol b'nei Yisrael l'dorotam. Now this verse is so circuitous and beautiful and confusing. It is a night of shimurim ladonai. It is being vigilant for whom?
Hashem.
For Hashem, for God. In order to bring them out of Egypt, lahotziam eretz Mitzrayim, comma, right? Even the cantillation has like an nachta, it's like a comma. Hu halayla hazeh. It's this night.
It's a person.
Ladonai. Right, it is for Ladonai Shimurim lechol b'nei Yisrael l'dorotam. It is a night for God, but now in the second part of the verse, who is it watched over for? It is a night of vigil for whom? For all the children of Israel for generations to come. Now, this verse, naming night as a night of Shmirah, a night of observance, of vigilance, of being watched over, right? Is it for God? Is it for the children of Israel? Is it a night, right? It's repeated often. It is a night for all generations to come. Look at Rashi. The first interpretive pass here is from Rashi in the 11th century. And here's Rashi. All three of the next sources, 9, 10, 11, are all Rashi's understanding. He writes, what does it mean? It is Shamur. It is a night of watching. Shaya Kadosh Baruch Hu Shomer u'mitzapelo lekayem haftachato lehotzi'am eretz Mitzrayim. What does this mean? It means it is Shamur. What does it mean that it's a night of watching over or being observed? God, as it were, held it in storage in anticipation of when God would fulfill God's promise made earlier in the book of Genesis. Like this is an appointment. Like God was like waiting and waiting and waiting until this night. This night was a night that was in God's calendar for 430 years. And Shamur means God was like holding back, as it were. This means almost inhibiting God's self. God was waiting for the right moment for Exodus to take place. That's what it means to be watched over. But Rashi also says, Hu halayla azel Adonai. Hu halayla in source 10. Hu halayla shamar le Avraham balayla azeh ani goel et banecha. The Mechilta and another midrashic source says that this night was a night in which God had promised to Abraham all the way back in the book of Genesis that on this night I'm going to redeem the Jewish people. There's a lot of pathos here, right? The night is being watched over by God. God is waiting till the right moment for redemption to take place. And the Torah is telling us, oh, this is the night where God, right, God, as it were, fulfills God's promise. But then Rashi feels that something is left out. And this comes back to what Rabbi Koloresis was saying and what Jeffrey was saying. Look at the third moment of Rashi, source 11. It's not enough. He had already said this is a night of watching, meaning it was God anticipating when God would redeem the people. But he says that's not enough. What does it mean to be a shimurim lechol b'nei Yisrael? He notes that the shimurim in the beginning of the verse is for God. It's a night of watching for God, as if God was anticipating. But the next part of the verse says it's a night of watching for the Israelites. What does that mean? It means, and it takes on now a different valence. Now it's a night of being taken care of and protected. Mishumar uba min hamazikin. Right? That he says it had two qualities. It's a night of watching over in the sense that the night was thick and dark, not just for them, but for God. In this theology, God is waiting for the night because God knew that they were suffering and that the time for redemption had not yet arrived. And Rashi paints a picture of a God who is, as it were, beholden to a promise, waiting to keep that promise, but waiting, right? It was holding back. Now, tonight's the night that I come clean on my promise that I made to Abraham. And in the second half of the verse, Rashi says the word shamur has a second quality, which is it's not just for God, but it's watched over for the Israelites, that they're protected, their homes are protected, there's not letting anything happen. Now this becomes another, like there are other opinions, right? The Ramban says that the Ibn Ezra says that what does it mean that it was a night of Shimurim? It means that it's a night where the Israelites will observe it, like the word Shmirat Mitzvot. There were so many elements of it that had to be observed, and so it's a night of observance. Right? It's a night of ritual observance. And then the Emek Davar, I just want to say this last one. This is the last source, and then I'm gonna bring it together slightly here before opening it up for the last time. I know we're covering a lot of ground, but there's so Rashi is talking about God's holding back, right, until that moment, and also watching over the Israelites. And then Ibn Ezra says, no, it's a night of ritual observance. The Ramban and others say something else. Here's another interpretation. Az hi sha'ah in source 13, right? Az hi sha'ah hamuchsheret liyot go'el, nig'al rather, because tzarot, b'asher haya az ge'ula rishona, al kein hu sha'at ha'kosher le'olam. V'zeh yom asa Hashem liyot gorem lazeh, right? The Emek Davar, the Netziv writes, because this was the time of Israel's first redemption, it was stored up for them for all generations as an auspicious time for deliverance from every type of affliction. He says Shimurim here means the way that you watch over something and put it aside. He said that night was the night of the beginning of the usage of a huge amount of redemptive power. What does that night's Shmirah mean? What does it mean that it was observed? It means not observed, doesn't mean anticipated. It means that the power of this night is that it holds all future redemptions. Like there's enough fuel, and it's like a rationing of fuel. Like it was a night of being given redemptive fuel, and that night used a little bit, but every future redemption would also be seen in the light of that last one. Now, for this moment, just for a second, just so you I just want to say one thing. Before I come in for a landing, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg writes about, in some sense, uses this last source to talk about the future redemption. And just so you know, in the language of Isaiah, the future redemption of the Jewish people and the world is couched in the language of the Exodus, but a new Exodus. An Exodus unlike the one that took place before, in which it won't happen by night, but by the light of the day. And that the sun will be stronger than it was, and right, it'll be as strong as it ever was. There's something about future redemption that has to do with a contra argument to the Exodus narrative. If you look at this last source, and then we'll end in a moment with Elie Wiesel. Rabbi Yitz writes, on the question of repetition, the prophet Isaiah told of a future exodus for the Israelites that would be even more splendid than the original liberation. Unlike the original happening, the future event would not be rushed. We wouldn't be eating the freedom meal with haste, dressed for the journey while hoping to leave at the first indication from Pharaoh that they could go. Isaiah may be referring to the return under Persian rulers from the Babylonian exile to the land of Israel. However, I read the verse, as does Jewish tradition, as open-ended to the distant future as well. The rabbis of the Talmud understood that the future Exodus would be equivalent to the reappearance of the original, but would have different characteristics reflecting the unfolding of the covenant of Israel. The sages believed that just as God self-limited in entering the covenant in biblical times, God had dramatically self-limited again in renewing the covenant in their time. Rabbinic Judaism is then a second stage of the covenant. And so Rabbi Yitz imagines also that God's revelation, as it were, in night was a way of saying there will be night. And in night, I will redeem you in night. But you'll have to endure night. But the future won't have night. The future won't have haste. The future will be by broad daylight. And so he reads the word Leil Shimurim as it's a night of watching, as it's a night in which you have to wait until eventually there will be, a nightless redemption, Continue to split the night, continue to turn the night into Torah, continue, It's part of an understanding that God, as it were, is moving in behind the scenes to make reality more and more whole, more and more free, but that you will have to endure tremendous night. And in that sense, I think what he's ultimately saying is Leil Shimurim means a night of incremental patience for liberation's slow march. Like a night of Shmirah means, it meant protection, but it also meant that it wouldn't be completely perfect. It would happen, You have to be a guard, like the way a guard watches for the night, Shomrim Hafkei L'Ircha, like you have to look and you keep looking and you keep looking, you're being vigilant, There's a vigilance. But there will come a time, Rabbi Yitz was imagining in Isaiah, where we don't have to guard the night, because the night will not be the mode in which we receive redemption. And in some ways, I was just going to say, I'm going to leave you with these two, obviously Elie Wiesel was playing off of this in his trilogy. Elie Wiesel was playing off of night, the night motif of Exodus, and his radical, disappointment would be the wrong word, subversion or perversion of night. Like for Elie Wiesel in the camps, it was as he wrote, a long night, the first night, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Now, we should do a whole course on Elie Wiesel's, how he works with biblical text and how he works with the rabbinic text, which he was completely versed in. But he's clearly working off of this notion that the son of redemption will be 7 times greater than the original son. He's saying that when I was in the camps, talk about redemption, God never came. God never came, right? And forget about the 7 times greatness of the son. He says the whole night was long, and there was no shmirah. There was no guarding, right? And he writes, never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath a silent blue sky. He actually, in some way, I want to say that he's in conversation with those Jews, those Israelite slaves who had endured a long, long, long night, in which they also had seen the small faces of children. We often forget this because we're so busy on the night of Passover thinking about, as the rabbis wanted to think about, they wanted to only think about the day. Like, let's not talk about the night. Let's remember now, we were redeemed, let's talk about the freedom. We're here in America now, we don't have to talk about the blood libels that all of our ancestors lived with each and every night of Passover for hundreds, and not 430 years. For almost a millennia, Jews in countries around the world, the night of Passover was the most terrifying night of the year, because it was during those nights that the Gentile neighbors would come with their pernicious, insidious, crazy conspiracy theories, like Al-Anon, crazy nuts, QAnon, craziness, right? Like that we had used the blood of their children for our matzah, right? And Jewish families would be sitting around just like we were in Egypt. It wasn't free. We were sitting in the midst of absolute terror that the Egyptians, Ukrainians, Polish, that they were going to come and knock on our doors. It's like, we think about it, we've only been like this for like less than 100 years, right? Less than 100 years. We have a lot of compassion for others who endured horrible, servitude and other things for 400 years. But we Jews, until this century, had no safety anywhere for almost 1,000 years. I mean, we had a couple of pockets of safety. Like, this wasn't some kind of like nice story. Like, every single night there was a mashchit that could come in every year. In Russia, and the Pale of Settlement, it could be knocking on the door and like, we're going to pull you out. So, like, I think that to some degree, like, Moshe comes to the people and he says to them, you know what? You've endured a long night, like Elie Wiesel's long night. You have memories and stories of families that were whisked away. Like when I was born, and I was only 80, so only 80 years ago, Moshe says, when I was born, male babies were being thrown into the Nile. Only 80 years ago. And here I am, he says, here I am in front of you. Nighttime was scary. Day was also scary, but night was worse. And so then God says to Moshe, like, everything is going to happen at the night. There's going to be, the 9th plague is going to be so dark, but you're going to have light. And that's the way I'll prove to you. And then look at Elie Wiesel's next 2 books in his trilogy, is Day and Dawn. Right? Day and Dawn. Those are the next 2 books. Look at this conversation in Day, in the book that Elie Wiesel wrote afterwards. The doctor comes to the character and says, do you believe in God, doctor? It says to the doctor, do you believe in God, doctor? And my question took him by surprise, right, in the second to last source here. My question took him by surprise. He stopped, suddenly wrinkling his head, his forehead. Yes, he answered, but not in the operating room. There, I only count on myself. His eyes looked deeper. He added, on myself and on the patient, or if you prefer, on the life in the diseased flesh. Life wants to live. Life wants to go on. It is opposed to death. It fights. The patient is my ally They fight, he fights on my side. Together we are stronger than the enemy. Take the boy last night. He didn't accept death. He helped me to win the battle. He was holding on, clinging. He was asleep, anesthetized, and yet he was taking part in the fight. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that Wiesel here is working along, right, the lines of, in the Passover narrative, God fights for us, right? And in the narrative of, as he reconstructs his life, it's not about God fighting for us. He answers the question, where was God in the camps? And saying, where were humans in the camp? And from now on, we're not going to wait for God. We have to be participating in making the night into day. We have to turn the night into the day. And that doesn't mean, right, that we don't believe in God any longer. We have emunah balelos. We have emunah, we have faith in the night, as Jay said. But we also, by day, we take it up. And we try to split the night and bring life and vitality and safety into the night. That's our job, as it were. And I think that he and Rabbi Greenberg were also in this conversation together. And it's a broader conversation about a theology for our day. And but I just love these texts in conversations with each other about what makes the night safe, right? What does it mean to watch over and to be protected? I think one last thing I'll say, and then I'll open it up to Rabbi Koloresis and others, and we'll take 10 minutes because it can be 5 minutes late upstairs. One of the reasons that on the evening of the first night of Passover, there's a custom to stay up all night and to read the Song of Songs in the Sephardi communities. It's very, very prominent. And just to think about turning the night into a time of lovemaking, right? That's what the tradition is saying, right? It's saying the nighttime was scary for you. And now life, lovemaking, life, like he was saying, life is life. Life wants to bring more life into the world. And that to turn the scary night and to enter it in this way, a night that is endured for thousands of years, and to say that on this night we're going to sing Song of Songs, right? In order for there to be real love, there has to be trust, and real, walls come down. So I think that it's a very beautiful, imagining that, especially, in that frame. I wanted to bring that to all of you, and I appreciate all the Torah that's happened. So I'm going to stop. Rabbi Koloresis had her hand up, and then we'll move, like, in the room, a couple of people, and there are a number of people online as well who have hands up. So we'll start with Rabbi Koloresis, and then Tony, and then Daniel, and then we'll go, and Paul, and then we'll go to Marilyn and Jessica. Rabbi.
So I think, first of all, so beautiful, so powerful, thank you. I think one of the things that's scary about night is that we have to, as the liturgy reflects, we have to surrender our consciousness, and we don't know that we're going to get up in the morning. So we don't know if night's a beginning or an ending. So there's something about night and death, and also difficult moments in history, the Holocaust, the destruction of the Second Temple. I mean, those moments where you don't know if it's the end. And what it feels like all these texts are saying to me is that Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, which also could have been an end, and Passover is a portal to a new beginning. That it looks like the end, the rabbis and the tradition is telling us, but actually it can be a beginning. But how can it become a beginning? It feels like it points to a set of practices, right? So it's Pesach and studying Torah at night, and engaging in tefillah at night. Like, what are the practices by which we can transform night into day and endings into beginnings? So that's my.
It's like you said a lot there, and like
all my takeaway from.
It's so beautiful. It's a beautiful takeaway. It's kind of actually blending together a number of the let's say medieval commentators. You blended them into one, like a very beautiful, succinct statement, which is, they're disagreeing about what shamur means. Does it mean to watch over, to be protected, to observe? And you're saying, no, they're all together. Like, in order to feel protected and to not only make it from night to day, you can bring day, as it were, into night by observing, having rituals, having practicum that actually help us turn the night as a terrified ending into like a fructive possible beginning. And that's what you said, you blended all those things. It's very beautiful.
And the ultimate challenge is to believe that death is not a full ending, but also a beginning. And what that means could be a whole conversation, right? But It's an interesting thought. Like, is death really an ending or a new beginning?
And I love that, and I think if anybody, if you go online after Shabbos and you look up or if you go back and read Elie Wiesel's book, either night, especially day and dawn, you'll see that he's literally, this is absolutely his conversation. He's in dialogue with death, and he says to death over and over again that, he talks about himself. He's obviously everybody knows he's talking about himself, like the dead are holding him back from living life. And right, his entire book is about like, how does he come to terms with the fact that he is an embodiment of the truth that there's life after death. Like, he is the proof, because he died in Auschwitz.
That's amazing.
And his grandmother, he saw his grandmother, he saw kids. He said, I am haunted by death, but I'm also cursed by life because I'm alive. And he winds up turning it on himself and saying, I myself am a proof that life goes on because I'm living. And the only way for me to deny that would be to commit suicide, God forbid, whatever. I could actually take my own life. But life is moving. And so he acknowledges that, like, life, as I said, wants more of itself, and that impulse is the source of divinity, and that he wants to affirm life's impulse to be more. And he kind of comes to terms with that, and it's profound what you said. I mean, it deserves its own week, month, but whatever. Thank you for that. That was really beautiful. Tony, and then Daniel, and then Tony, yeah.
So with all due respect to Rabbi Koretz, beautiful, both of you. God, 1-2 punch, mind-blowingly beautiful. This is why we pay you the big bucks, bro.
Yes. Clearly.
But I'm going to say it with all due respect to Rabbi Koretz.
Who's Rabbi Koretz?
Rabbi Koretz.
Me?
Koretz.
Kohler.
You
know,
It's okay.
I'm
Tony, we're waiting for you to give us your Torah. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, the power of death is that all practices fail. We cannot practice. The very essence of death is we can't practice there. We're one of those part Jews known as St. John of the Cross.
Yes.
Talked about the dark night of the soul.
Yes.
In life. And the challenge of death is all practices hit that wall and die. So that's one thing. The other
I don't agree, but later conversation.
Okay, the other thing I would say, and with all due respect, because you don't like my bringing up that other book, that nice Jewish boy, the King of the Angels, Jesus, Yeshua,
I like that
said, I come as a thief in the night. Watch, I come as a thief in the night. So he himself was in dialogue with this.
Of course he was.
Yeah.
Of course he was. I am the light, I am the way. He was literally, he was the Paschal offering.
Exactly.
He said of himself, so that was the theology of Christianity, was that Jesus would be the light and the way, and the door. By the way, when he says, I am the door, he meant that he would become the mezuzah. He was the portal to everlasting life. So it was a very similar, all very similar, working with the same themes. Right?
Last but not least, William Blake says, God appears and God is light for those who dwell in realms of night, but does a human face display for those who dwell in realms of day.
So we're going to talk about this a little bit today. They're going to open up about human faces, and it might come, we're not going to talk about Jay's really important question, provocation about why Moshe and God in the Torah don't actually, right? If Pharaoh thinks he's God, that if you look at my face, you'll die, why not say, I'll look at your face and I won't die, which is, by the way, he does come back to see Pharaoh's face, it's clear, but not in the way that Jay's saying it. And, there's something about seeing, right? The veloro ish et achiv, in the makat choshech, in the darkness, not being able to see your brother's face, your sister's face, your fellow human's face, that Passover is, of course, in dialogue with that as well, which is like, the face of the Egyptian, the face of Pharaoh, the face of God, the face. So all beautiful motifs that each deserve their own thematic open book, like, face of human, face of God, face of Pharaoh. Let's talk about the face. So we'll come back to that. I want to weigh in on the dialogue, on this debate of whether or not death you can enter death. And I think that whether or not death is close to us, right, is a good point of conversation, debate. But whether or not the desire or the fear that death has over us and whether it can inhibit life is not really up for debate. And I think that if you were an Israelite slave who lived through 430 years of slavery, you don't really believe at that moment that life is worth living, as it were. You kind of wish that you were dead. And that impulse, right, is a strong impulse. That's what I think Elie Wiesel is playing with, is the impulse of life to negate itself, because it's too much, it's too much, it's too much.
Too much to bear.
Too much to bear, it's too much. And the desire for the end of night. So how we end the night is itself up for question. Do we end the night by bringing light into the night and to then give us the ability to then, right, to survive, thrive in the night, or whether or not we close ourselves off? We have our festive meal at night. It's a kind of answer in of itself. Okay, Jay, Daniel.
Mine is a quick question.
Paul, yeah.
Clarification. In the text, it refers to the night as who?
Hu halayla, yeah.
A person,
Yeah,
not Zeh Laila.
yeah.
So I was wondering what would be behind that.
Yeah, I think that here it's interesting. I think getting into whether or not the personification of the night is itself a kind of literary trope, but I think just purely on the pshat level, Hu halayla here is signaling that it's the night that they knew. They had a tradition that there would be a night. There's a night. It's the night, right? And even though the night meaning here that night versus halayla, Hu halayla, you know, that it's there's a way of signaling it out in some way. But I'd have to do much more research to come back to the Hu halayla question.
Okay.
But
Isn't
beautiful,
it his light? His light?
right?
Hu halayla, his light?
No, it'd be he is the night. Hu halayla, he is the night. But it's not
He,
used
not
that
it.
way. That's a hyperliteral way. It's not. Paul had his hand up, and then I'm going to go to, I promise, to Marilyn, Jessica.
If Rashi is right, then the valence of the Israelites' cry that God responded to is different. It's not that, or perhaps it's not that God remembered his covenant, but God, hearing that cry, understood that the time was right, that this is the moment that the movement towards freedom must begin. Because as we know in revolutions, timing is very, very important. And they presumably cried a lot over the course of 400 years, but God understood that at that cry, that specific cry, was the moment that the Exodus needed to begin.
Oh my gosh, such a rich topic of what's known in later tradition, awakening from below versus awakening from above. There's a very rich tradition that says that in Egypt, the Israelites had no merit of their own. One voice, it's not the only voice about the Israelites, but there is a very strong voice that says the Israelites were redeemed by God's grace, not because they merited it at all, and that it's known as an awakening from above. God decided, right? And yet that is in tension with an older tradition that says, of course, that God made a promise, right? And how do you reconcile those two things, right? God made a promise, so it wasn't as if God was doing them a favor. God had made a promise to redeem them at a certain time. And the tension there is, if they hadn't merited it, God would have done the redemption earlier. And since they didn't merit it, it happened in its time. And so, of course, then the question is, okay, so it was in its time, but it seems in the text that what was triggered in its time was the crying of the Israelites. So what is the relation between human desire, human longing, and moving, as it were, moving God, having God respond to that? And that's a bigger conversation, but there is pathos in this vision of the Israelites, you know, as it were, triggering God's compassion through their cries, right? As if a dormant God was awakened by the extreme crying of the Israelites, or whoever it be, that they had suffered enough. It's also a painful idea theologically, because how much suffering is required to trigger God's compassionate response? That's exactly what I think Wiesel is playing against, the silent blue sky. It's like, how many cries of children, 1 million children were crying, and yet, you know. And I think in Yitzhak Greenberg's theology, it's God's holding back, which can become a perverse theology too. I just want to name that. But God's own self-limitation is a part of giving human beings greater and greater freedom and greater capacity to split the night on their own, with their own, with their own moral intuition, with their own moral evolution. And anyway, broader question, but night. Okay, Marilyn, go ahead, and then Jessica. And great, great point, yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Marilyn.
Yes, I love the idea of like Shmura, the Shmura Matzah, as you're saving it up for the future. That it's a night to be saved up for the future. And of course, we're studying with Rabbi Diane the Joseph and the 7 years of plenty, and the 7 years of want, and this, and it almost is like the matzah is reminding us that we need to self-limit, because that redemption is got to be played, it's going to be played out in the future. It's a reminder, not that just that we were redeemed, but that we will be redeemed, like you said, like sort of, and then of course, even Elie Wiesel brings in the 7 and the 7.
Yeah, so Marilyn, just 1 second. So I know that I have to run upstairs, and I wanted to hear Jessica before I go up, but I just want to say that I just want to frame what you said and then add a little piece to it, because you trigger something in me. So there was the position in the understanding of the word shamur, that it's a night of shmirah, a night of being watched. There was that understanding of the Emek Davar, the Netiv, who said that it's being watched over, like the matzah, meaning it's watched over in the sense of held back or stored for later usage, right? That's not always the way that we think about the matzah as matzah shmurah, but that's one of the meanings. And I want to just add from what you said that it seems to me that the telling of the story, each night of Passover for the last 2,000 years itself has been an unpacking of some of that latent, stored up, redemptive possibility. That every night of Passover for 2,000 years, where we got together to tell one another the story of how we were once redeemed, itself was the medicine needed to continue to believe that redemption was possible. Like, it is a Leil Shimurim, because each and every year, in each and every country that we were in, through 2,000 years of exile, and even now through various exiles, social exiles, spiritual exiles, right, class exiles, and so on, we get to tell this powerful story of redemption, of the possibility amidst impossibility of there being a better future, a better day ahead. And so I just love that that's kind of now in the Leil. It's a night of taking some of that borrowed, like the word shmirah also means to shomer, somebody who watches over something. Like you're given something and you watch over it. And so we're all shomrim, we all are given this thing to watch over, and it's called hope. And every year we are allowed to go in and take some of that hope out and say, I need a little bit of this for this year. So I'm going to bring it to Jessica, and then I'm going to have to leave, but obviously, there's more going on. Go ahead, Jessica.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
I really want to say this, so let's hope I can. It's so helpful. This is such a helpful conversation. And paraphrasing something Rabbi Diane said about a portal to a new beginning. For 5 years, I was hired by the State Department to research about xenophobia around the world. And a Czech colleague said to me when I was asking about why people hate each other, he said, in the basement of the house of hate, you will find the fear. And so I started something called the Fear Project, where I asked 13 questions to hundreds of people, ages 4 to 94 in 8 countries, gay, straight, black, white, red, blue, all religions. So some people fear terrorism, other people fear the police, but everyone fears the same things. And so many people feared the dark. And as a drama therapist working in prisons and domestic violence shelters and zones of conflict, so many people have been traumatized at night and have insomnia. So the idea of splitting the night is so powerful. And I remember when I was young and I was a Buddhist student studying with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, I'll just finish with this last sentence. He would call us for a 7 o'clock, Dharma talk, and he would show up often at 10. We'd sit there for 3 hours. But whatever time he showed up at night, he would start by saying, good morning. And he said that was his way of splitting the night.
It's beautiful.
So one of my favorite songs, is a song written by maybe my favorite musical artist, Bruce Springsteen. Which, you know, as an artist, not just as a, you know, as a crooner, but he's a screamer, but he's a brilliant, some call him like one of the great bards of the American experience. And he wrote a song originally for Patti Smith, that then was covered by 10,000, you know, the 10,000 Maniacs, right? And it's called Because the Night, right? People might have heard it, you know. Because the night belongs to lovers, because the night belongs to us. And it has a lot of, in the lyrics, it has a lot about what happens in the night in a negative way, right? And, you know, take me as I am. And it's a powerful transformation, you know, transfiguration or whatever, transvaluation of the night. Jessica, I just want to say, I would love to see those questions that you know, and know more about that project. Sounds like an incredible project. So maybe you'll tell us more about it at some point. We will be able to learn more about those questions, because I think that in almost every situation, fear is what's happening. There's a lot of fear, and so if Pesach and this shiur was in some way an homage to Shabbat HaGadol, the great Shabbat, where the Israelites, according to tradition, the first ever Shabbat HaGadol was the 10th of Nisan in Egypt, and where the Israelites took the thing they feared the most, which was the god of Egypt, that lamb, and they were told to bring it close. They were told to bring it in and to watch over it. Also, to the word shamor, you had to watch over it. There had to be a mishmeret for 4 days, and they had to get to know their scary thing, and then they had to, of course, slaughter it and use its life force, right, on its doorpost to be born. It was the very life force that was in the thing that was feared the most that gave them the power to leave their homes and in the middle of the night, right? And so for all of those who've ever had to walk into the night and who had the courage to do so and to bring others through their individual and collective nights, the Shabbat Gadol is a blessing that God helps us split whatever nights are, you know, appearing to us, standing by the door, heralding Elijah the prophet and saying, you know, please help us find a way to bring light into darkness. Amen.